Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Indicator podcast, where we talk to people who work to make evaluation systems stronger. Hopefully, after today's episode, you'll think harder about every terms of reference you work on. And that's because we'll be talking about commissioning evaluations with Patricia Rogers, founder of Better Evaluation and a former professor of public sector evaluation, and something of a legend in the evaluation community. Welcome, Patricia.
Thanks, Dugan, for the invitation.
So the process of contracting someone to do an evaluation is called commissioning, and it's hard to do well. We'll be arguing today that poorly commissioned evaluations can undermine the best evaluator, but thoughtful commissioning can turn even a modest evaluation into a really genuine learning opportunity. So Patricia, you've sat on both sides of the commissioning relationship, as an evaluator being commissioned and as a commissioner yourself. When you think about genuinely good commissioning, what does it feel like from each side?
Well, I think the ideal is really a partnership. It's a working partnership. They're the ones that really work, where it's a mutual learning exercise about, what's needed, what might be done, and how you can really do it within the resources that are available. The time, the money, the data that's there. They're the ones that have really worked. The ones that have just been awful experiences for everyone has been when that relationship is, one, it's contractual. It's, trying to drive a hard bargain, drive down the cost and not be worried about what it does, putting unreasonable expectations on it, thinking you've somehow got a bargain if you've added more and more to the relationship, to the contract of what's required. And just really not being helpful. I mean, I saw one where they, in their terms of reference, they didn't put down what existing data were there. So they were expecting evaluators to come up with a design to answer these questions. And they gave them no indication about what data was already available in the organisation. And it was like, well, they're so clever, they'll figure it out. Well, you can't. You don't know what's in the organisation. So it's really surprised me when I've seen those really adversarial relationships. They really don't help. And to be really clear, a partnership is not saying you give them an easy pass. It's actually the other way. You work out together. How do we get a good outcome? How do we get, and evaluation's going to answer the questions in a way that's credible and useful and timely, and fits the budget, and that people feel they want to do that again.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to this question of the partnership and whether people really feel like they're kind of being set up to deliver their best. But let's come to the kind of key element in a commissioning exercise, which is the terms of reference. Now, a terms of reference can either really open up or in some ways close down an evaluation before it even starts. If you can pin it down to one major thing, what do you think makes the difference between a TOR that enables good work and one that constrains it from the outset?
Well, some clarity, obviously, about why they're doing the evaluation. And, or sometimes the ones that they'll say, accountability and learning. And you go, yeah, okay, well, that's good, but who? For what? I mean, one of the other... Yeah, exactly. One of the other things in my work, a lot of what I've done is I've been on both sides as someone being commissioned and someone doing commissioning, which incidentally I actually did really awfully. It's part of what drives me to help people to do it better. But the other one that I've done a lot of work with is working with organisations to improve their commissioning. And that's a sort of perspective on it. And, one of the things is to be really clear about why you're doing this evaluation. But the biggest problem I see in TORs, and other people see too, is this mismatch between what they want and what resources are available. And the resources might be the size of the budget that's available, the length of time to do it, or the length of time before it starts. There are networks, that discussion lists that evaluators are on, where they share really bad TORs. And some Some of them they'll say, the proposals have to be in by Friday, and on Monday you'll be at some distant country starting
in Papua New Guinea, starting your field work.
Well, Papua New Guinea is just around the corner from Australia, so that's not so hard.
For you, right? Yeah.
But yeah, exactly, and they're just really unrealistic in all sorts of ways. The timelines is often really, really poor, and I think people sometimes have this expectation that, there's heaps of evaluators you can just pick up off the shelf and work on it. And yet often you want a real mix of skills. You need a team, you need liaison, they need space in their calendars. And if they're going to travel, they've got to be able to organise that. So that mismatch, or they'll have literally 20 key evaluation questions or 50.
Oh, my worst. I saw one yesterday with 38 key evaluation questions.
Yeah. No, it's not. And that clarity is really important. So I think the hardest evaluation I ever did, which I'll talk about a bit later, but it was a huge evaluation over multiple years. And one of the things that helped us keep sanity as well as focus was having 7 really good key evaluation questions. And every report we went back to that and said, what are we learning at these?
Right.
And so if you've got 58 or 28 or it's just
forget.
Just less is more. Yeah.
So Patricia, in the advertising and the selection stage, commissioners often say that's where they're looking for diversity, for new voices, new faces, new names. But then when you see who gets these contracts, you find that it's often the same people anyway. What do you think is going on? And have you seen it done differently well?
So, sometimes it is about the nature of the work that's being done, that it actually needs a team, and some of the people who would be really good to contribute to this are not part of a team. So, one of the strategies used is actually, I've seen where they sort of have almost a matchmaking where different individuals who are interested in evaluation come to they help set up a meeting or help facilitate that so that so they can put together a consortium that will have the necessary skills. So that's one way that can do that. The other way is to have a sort of staged process, where, because one of the problems is that the procurement systems often put a huge burden on developing these proposals. They can be huge pieces of work, and you do that for something and don't get it. You're very limited how many more unpaid days and weeks you can do on proposals in your small enterprise. So
interesting, because I was reading that Australian Evaluation Society blog that you mentioned. And that was one of the things they suggest, was kind of breaking big evaluation projects into smaller pieces. But as somebody who's worked on those projects, that has its own problems, because, then you're dealing with procurement that many more times rather than just one big procurement, So these things are hard to do well. And I want to come back to this, this Australian Evaluation Society conference session that you mentioned to me on moving from transactional to relational commissioning. And you referred to that earlier when you said it's a partnership. Can you unpack that distinction between transactional and relational commissioning a bit? When you're doing transactional commissioning, how does it look like in practice? And what happens when it becomes relational?
Yeah, I'd certainly refer you to that. The actual blog is great, in terms of talking about that. With some examples, and do the links, because I think there's a lot of really good thinking and talking about this going on. And I think what's really important to be clear, this is not about relaxing probity and accountability and all of those things. It's not, you employ your friends and don't check up on their work. It's much more about setting up time to get to know people. Some of the examples they've talked about is where the evaluation is, for example, of programs in Indigenous communities where Indigenous people have control over those, and they need to be confident with the evaluator. They need to get to meet them. They need to check them out. And so you can do a staged process where you have a small engagement, and if at the end of it it's not working out, they'll start again, but they haven't invested. They haven't made big one investment decision up front. So I think that's part of what that's about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that commissioners, the people who are essentially buying these services, hold so much power in these transactions, and these relationships become very inequitable. How do you create the conditions for an evaluator to bring their genuine professional judgment and to tell a commissioner something that they don't want to hear, rather than just delivering what they think is expected? And I'm smiling because this is, in my career as an evaluator, this was always so hard to give people a really frank assessment in a way that they can hear.
Yeah, and part of it is, how you do it, how you deliver the message.
Yeah, very much about how you do it.
Yeah, even what you look at. So it's not just at the report stage, but even what the focus will be, where you've got people drawing the boundaries around it. In fact, shaping the evaluation in ways that are not honest. Oh, you don't need to go to that site. Let's talk to these people. It's very easy.
Don't talk to those people, yeah.
Yeah. It was, Michael Scriven, really early on, he was very concerned about how a lot of evaluators became too cozy with the program, and the program would set up who they should talk to, and were basically doing a spin job, and the evaluators needed to have a bit of distance. So it's the opposite of relational, but at least being, a bit more critical about who they speak with, and looking for, unintended effects and extra things that were not necessarily what they wanted to hear.
So to come back to this question of for example, draft feedback is a moment where a commissioner can really strengthen or compromise an evaluation's integrity. So what does good feedback practice look like, and how can evaluators know they're being massaged?
Yes, yeah. Look, this is one of those sort of pivotal moments. You talked about the TOR as pivotal, so is the sort of draft evaluation report. And I've had all sorts of different versions of it, from one where we had worked really hard to do this beautiful, clear report around their key questions and all of that. And we went to talk about the report, and they held it up and said, "Look, it's not very thick." They waved the papers in. This wouldn't even be a master's thesis. We want it thicker.
We wanted more.
And so we went back in with all the detail of the stuff.
Everything.
Yeah. So that was one of the most disappointing bits. And that was very much about a power. If you don't do this, we won't pay you. And so that was a really awful experience that everyone on the team was scarred for life from that one. Not just that moment.
I remember contacting you in a very difficult evaluation and asking you how to give hard feedback. And you said there were three things. The one was to be very specific and very detailed about the issues. The second was to be as early as possible with that kind of negative feedback. And the third was to be constructive, like to suggest ways of managing the situation that was becoming apparent. And I've always found those three tips, which I got from you, very helpful.
Yeah, I think generally if you're looking at, programs, people would rather know early on that there's a problem, so they can fix it, rather than at the end saying, well, actually it was all a waste of time. So that's important. I mean, I think it depends what you found. If you've actually found wrongdoing and issues, that's quite different. That's a different sort of approach that we're talking about. But with the feedback, one of my experiences was where we'd found a real problem in implementation, and about the delays that had been happening in this process had actually caused really huge problems, to the success of a lot of the work. And so we named that, and we actually did a whole report on that. And I agreed that that report would be an internal report so that we could be very frank and detailed and specific, not identified, but specific about things. But then in the final report, we referred to that, and the organisation said, "Oh, we don't need to put that in because we already know that." And I said, "Yeah, we do, because it's one of the learnings that delays were actually really a problem, and in the future you need to avoid that." And all the time I was having that conversation, I was very aware that when we had replied to the TOR, we had said, "We are members of the Australasian Evaluation Society and are bound by its code of ethics, which is attached to our proposal." And one of the principles is that you must provide fair and balanced reporting. You can't just cut stuff out because it's unpalatable. And so I was just really aware that, if we were going to come down to a real legal discussion about it, we were going to go back to that. So, that's which sort of goes back to your question about the power. The professional association gives some
power.
Some power, and particularly if you build that into your contracts at the start about that. Yeah.
So one of the commissioning tools you've worked on is the Manager's Guide to Evaluation, a very helpful tool that people can find on Better Evaluation. And this was originally designed, as I understand, to support the IDRC in particular, but it's become much more widely used. I've used it, and I know a lot of other people have used it. How was that compiled, and have you found it to be a useful tool? Do you get good feedback on it from others?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's the Canada's International Development Research Centre who fund research programs around the world, and they do a lot of really good evaluation at different levels that they contract out, and that's done by program managers. So they have an internal evaluation unit that doesn't do all their evaluations, but they support managers to develop good terms of reference and manage them well. And what they wanted was some guidance to codify some of the advice that they would be giving so that their time could be spent on, extra things.
Content,
and, specialist things. So the first part of that was to see, are there existing guidance that would fit their needs? And so we got to actually read the guidance of lots of organisations. And there's lots of good bits, but it didn't really fitted, brought it all together. So then the task was to get a structure and some guidance and some resources around that, walking through the process of developing, being clear about what you want, developing the terms of reference, contracting, and so on. And I learned a lot from that because part of it was this really thoughtful stuff that IDRC did. For example, when they got to procurement, they didn't just draw up a little advertisement and put it on a few notice boards. They actually identified, they had a list of potential evaluators who might be suitable, and they let them know well in advance that this was coming up, so that they would, first of all, see the advertisement, think about leaving a space in their calendar, start to identify other people they might work with, maybe give some feedback on, what might be helpful to consider in it. I mean, all those things. They didn't just do one. There was no inappropriate procurement there, but they would, make it a bit more visible. Now, that's something I hadn't seen in any sort of guidance, because the guidance tends to be written by evaluators and they don't see what's going on in the organisation.
Right. Interesting, yeah.
You see the bad practice, you don't know what works well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you only know about it when it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, often. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So just kind of at the meta level, you've been involved in writing a chapter for a new edited volume on commissioning. And what's the core argument in your chapter that you wanted to record. And did writing the chapter crystallize anything that you hadn't quite articulated previously?
Yeah. Just first of all, the book is a great idea, really looking at how commissioning evaluation can support democratic processes. So, I've often thought about it in terms of how it can support good evaluation, but this is specifically looking at democracy, which is, of increasing concern as it becomes under threat. Some of that, the issues we looked at, I worked on it with Steve Montague from Canada, and we picked up some of the issues that Dugan, you and I've looked at in terms of democracy and evaluation processes when we looked at the South African evaluation system. So, issues around transparency and participation are a really big part of that. Being transparent that an evaluation has happened, that how it was done, what the criteria were, what the findings were, having some level of transparency around that is actually a really important part of it. And commissioning that includes that. There's just really still too much commissioning where someone's engaged to do an evaluation and a lot of money is spent, some sort of report is produced, and there's no transparency about how that procurement happened or how it was done or, what the findings were. And a number of organisations use devices to get around it. They might have a policy that says we must publicly advertise evaluation tenders, so they'll call it a review. So it doesn't have to go through that. So transparency is a big part of it.
I guess the danger is that without that transparency, that you just get these kind of sort of death loop. What's the word I want? Echo chambers that just repeat and recycle the same sort of perspectives again and again, and there's a stagnant intellectual pond, right?
Or there's just justification. I mean, it's not even a stagnant intellectual pond. It's not even intellectual. It's just sometimes just tell us we did a good job, and cobble together some data to say you did a good job. So it's really not. It's not just that it's transparent. It's actually the quality is really
damaging.
Poor. And damaging, yeah. But the other one is inclusion. And so if you have proper inclusion or adequate inclusion, you are having different perspectives. And other people bring other evidence to bear. And obviously the degree to which you can do that varies. But I think, some of the issue about commissioning is that there needs to be some serious consideration to how you do that. And again, I've seen terms of reference that said, oh yes, we're going to do a participatory evaluation in 6 weeks across 5 countries. And, it's a sort of participatory knowledge, I would say. And that actually bothers me. I would much rather if people say, we've only got 6 weeks, we have to get a report, we won't be able to be really participatory, this is what we're going to do instead. We're going to talk to organisations or key informants or draw on some previous work because, let's be honest, we can't do it. So I think being honest about that's there. So they were the sort of things we thought about. The thing that sort of surprised me is that I've connected it to some of the other issues I've been interested in, which is the whole sort of evidence movement and often the emphasis on what works, which, focuses on average effects of programs. And fundamentally, I think it's undemocratic because democratic is not just we do what's good for the majority.
The majority. Right.
It's a good democracy recognises that what you need for some people is going to be different. And it's not like everyone can have everything, but you have to be you have to be aware when a program is hurting some people, and especially if it's hurting the most vulnerable people. Like it's just no good to say, well, on average, it's really good.
Mostly it's okay. Yeah.
Mostly it's okay. So that was the bit that sort of surprised me, that I just went, look, in the end, I just don't think that's democratic.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I think it's so kind of falls within the mindfulness domain, right? Like when you're commissioning, it's about really thinking deeply about why you're doing this evaluation, what the perfect set of skills would look like, and then essentially managing it in a really conscious and mindful way. So that's very helpful. And I asked you to bring a report or a resource that you'd like to review with us, something that you find instructive, and I'm delighted with your choice. Won't you tell us a bit about that evaluation report?
Yeah, I felt a bit embarrassed to sort of bring in one of my reports and say, look at this one. But until you said, look, one that reflects on commissioning, and I thought, well, that one really does. There's a lot there. So this was this huge evaluation that I was involved in that was over 4 years, and it was the Stronger Families and Communities Strategy by the Australian Government, and it had over 600 different projects through 7 funding initiatives, $80 million Australian dollars, and a really ambitious set of questions and intent to make a real difference to a lot of communities and families, who are really very disadvantaged and needing this to work well. So so the report, I was just so relieved to finally get to the end of it, because we did bring together a lot of work, but it did, I think, encapsulate some of the good practices of commissioning, and some of them are in the report. So one of the things is that the evaluation took really seriously the design, and I think a lot of commissioning does this very poorly. They either think that the program manager, as part of the terms of reference, sets out a design. Oh, we'll do a survey and we'll do this, and they're often not really.
They're not qualified. Yeah,
they're not qualified to do it. So that's not so helpful. The game that a lot of Australian ones seem to do is they say, give us a free design and then we'll pick one of you to actually do it. And so that's where you spend huge amounts of unpaid time developing designs. And in the worst cases, the department will then say, thanks, that's really good. We've decided to do it in-house, and they take the design and implement.
Oh my gosh, the worst.
So,
Absolute worst.
that's right. And so what this one did was they said the design for this evaluation is going to be really difficult. That needs to reflect the framing. So they actually commissioned a 1-year project to frame it up. What were the questions? And what was the design that would answer it? So they had a lot of consultation with people. That's where they did a lot of the participatory work. What do we need to know? What would be credible evidence? How will we bring it together? That was funded.
So the design was a separate contract.
Yeah, the framing and design. Yeah, so they did the two. They did all these.
That's often. You see, often I think one bundles them all together because you just want to do one procurement. Yeah. But it's actually much better to divide them, right?
And
not
also,
always, but often.
You might not have the same skills. The ones who are good at designing it and doing that
field
consultation
work
might not be the data crunchers and field work people.
Right.
So,
right.
I think that was that's quite a unique approach. Then they took really seriously the managing of it. They actually had a full-time project manager from the inside in the department, keeping a track on it all. And we had...
And you didn't feel that compromised your independence or the independence of the evaluation in any way?
No, I don't think so. Because, there was back and forth about it. So with the design, one of the features of the design was that it had emergent elements. So that we said we'll do 10 case studies, but we didn't say what we would do case studies of. Because as the other data came out, we could say, well, this is starting.
This is what we need to look at, yeah.
This might be a thing to look at. And also within the department, they were saying, here are some policy issues that are coming up that we would really like you to look at it from this perspective. And so we had a process where we would put up, we had a lot of interim reports, it's like, I think think it was each 6 months, we'd say, here's what we've learnt to date. Here's how the other stuff is going. Here's some suggestions for the next case study. And we would put up some proposals, and then they would say, well, we want this one. And so it didn't compromise our independence because we weren't being told you can't look at that or whatever.
Right. Look,
were,
I've had that job. If you remember, I've been the person in the government department liaising with the evaluators. But the other thing that struck me when I looked at that report yesterday was that it was long. It took long to do that evaluation. It was, as you said, a year to do the design, and then like 2 years to do the field work and write the report, right?
Oh no, it was 3 years. 4 years.
Yeah.
4 years. Oh, actually, it was 4 years. Yeah, there was a lot of work I did at the end, going back and forth with feedback. Yeah, to get it.
To tie it all up. Yeah.
To get it tied up and get it published. Everything, I got everything published, but the one I agreed would be an internal document. So that was that took a lot of work. So the process of the feedback was good in that they would consolidate the feedback. You know, they would actually say, you know, give me this page of 70 things. On page 16, you say this, and so then I could come back and say, okay, number 16, yes, agree, change. Or this one, no, we won't. The data support it. We're not going to change it. You know, so this took a long time. We had a lot of reports. Yeah, but it was then.
So Patricia,
yeah.
So now, if a senior official is listening to this podcast, someone who commissions evaluations regularly, but who hasn't really thought about their power in their commissioning role, if they were going to change one thing after listening to this conversation, what would you want it to be?
Yeah, that was a great challenge. And I sat puzzling over this. You know, it's always one thing and I want lots. But I think the one thing is to think by analogy. You know, imagine you're trying to get a house built or a new room built on your house. How would you engage people? What would you actually want? Would you want to sit by yourself and draw something up of what you need and then put it out and ask people to quote on something that you drew up yourself without having the expertise to know what's suitable? Would you just want to just say, I'll commit you to a price and no matter what happens, I want it like that? Or do you want to actually have some sort of a process where you can bring together someone perhaps to help you be clearer about what it is you want and what you need and what you can actually afford, and bring those together? Now, sometimes that's an architect, but sometimes it might be someone else who helps through what is it that you need. Then how do you design it? So framing it, what do you need? Designing, how might you do it? And then actually doing it. And then probably also some level of someone to check up on the doing, you know. But in Australia, we used to have building inspectors who'd go in and check that the concrete was the right depth and all that sort of stuff. And they privatised that. And surprisingly, there's been a lot of problems ever since. But but you know, in evaluation, you should do that. You should say, okay, they've put up a design, get someone else to check it. They've done some analysis, get someone to check it. So I think that one thing to take away is to think about doing an evaluation like building a house, and you know, think about it in that way.
Thank you very much. This has been really interesting. I hope you have a lovely weekend and all the best to our listeners. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.